Austin, I want to get to the other side of the ravine. And I don't want to jump. Is there any other way?
Unfortunately, when encountering situations where you're standing in front of a ravine, sometimes you're going to have to take the leap. Metaphorically, of course. If you're actually in front of a ravine, we do not suggest that. So YouTube, don't do that. But back on topic. So in life, we often encounter situations where you can only get so far. To most of us, we would say that there's a ceiling to what we can do in life. And in order to bypass that ceiling, more often than not, you have to take that risk. You have to take the leap, so to speak. So in circumstances like that, of course, metaphorical, when you're standing in front of a ravine and you want to get to the better, brighter side of life, you're going to have to take that leap and take that risk, because you can only go so far playing it safe. Playing it safe only allows you to access just this much when there's that much left of life. And I know you all can't see the ceiling left. But however, there's a large amount of space between this and the ceiling, because when, again, you're playing it safe, I would say that you don't have access to all that life has to offer. And when you say, hey, look, I am no longer afraid, I am no longer scared, I'm going to take this leap, you access a large part of life and experiences that you would have never known existed until you take that leap. And you'll never know how it feels to fly until you take the leap. So if you want to fly, if you want to experience new heights of life, take that fear and pack it up so you can go ahead and take that leap. So Jose.
Yes, sir.
How do you feel about taking the leap? I feel like this is something that we have become accustomed to, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. Sips coffee dramatically.
Only for dramatic effects.
Of course.
I want to make something clear, and that's that taking the leap never becomes easier. The level of risks that you're going to have to take, no matter at what stage you're at, they never change in terms of the activation energy. You get better, doesn't get easier.
Harkening back to one of our later podcasts, well, not too late, go check that out.
Wait, I don't even remember the title. But anyways, let me get back onto the tangent here, or the topic. The reason I bring this up is because we all think that there's a finite end at which we peak. We achieve glory, we achieve greatness, or life itself becomes easy. Sacrifices go away, and everyday success is guaranteed. But that's not the case. If you run $1 million business, you always have to put in $1 million business worth of work into the business. The systems that you have to uphold are very complex and logistically elaborate. And you have to make sure that all the components continuously operate. All the cogs in the wheel are spinning. And that requires a great degree of friction. So sure, you become better at taking these leaps, but that knot in your stomach does not go away. So I don't want this podcast to set the false expectation that, hey, it's just going to go away. You only have to take the leap once. And although it's true that you really only have to hit the bank with one big success in order to get the ball rolling, hearkening to a conversation we had off camera with a reference to Jujutsu Kaisen, you have to hit black flash after black flash after black flash. You need to be clutch on all your moves subsequently after a good move.
You know what this makes me think of? So that feeling of kind of angst and, always having that perpetual feeling of, okay, this is still something that startles me or is a little off-putting. that is our natural fight or flight response to things. You know, it's in all of us. We have a fight or flight response. And now that we're not fighting animals, lions, tigers, bears, and stuff like that like we are today, we're fighting more trivial battles that aren't as physical. They're more mental and psychological. That fight or flight response still kicks in. So when we're dealing with these things, we get that natural fight or flight response. But most people's response to those two options, their choice to those two options, whether it is conscious or unconscious, is most of the time going to be flight. Now, what I think that we have become better at, a lot better at, is instead of saying, hey, we're going to flee because we're scared of the situation, or we're going to put it off, we're not going to go towards it, we say, hey, look, we know that this is something challenging, but it's a roadblock that we have to get past in order to get what we want regardless. So I think a big part of taking the leap is realizing that, again, you have a choice, and we talked about choices in one of our last podcasts, but you have to choose to fight. And of course, sometimes that is actually physical, but most times it is more mental than anything. So when I say fight, I mean face the obstacle head on and realize that, okay, on the other side of this obstacle is the thing that you want. So instead of fleeing and try to go around it, more often than not, you can't go around it. You're probably going to have to go through it. So taking control of yourself and realizing that I can choose to fight instead of flee. That's something that you have to make a conscious effort in trying to get better. And as you continuously choose fighting, your body, your brain, your mind is going to naturally adapt and get better at choosing that fight response to things. So now when things come up, you're no longer scared of trying to face them. You're like, okay, this is another situation. I don't know how I'm going to deal with it, but I'm going to deal with it. And when you choose that, when you choose to fight, and it becomes more of a habit for you, it makes life a lot easier. Because now when things come up, you're not procrastinating and you're not scared of them. So you get things done a lot faster. And as we have progressed, we have progressively gotten very fast with our decisions and with dealing with our roadblocks. Because again, it gets better, not easier. We continuously deal with roadblocks. We continuously deal with things that are trying to, inhibit our progression forward. But now instead of trying to think of some, convoluted way of going around it or hoping that it gets resolved itself, no, we attack it head first and the problem gets resolved, say in a couple days or a day, when it used to get resolved in weeks to months or never get solved in general. So.
Well, and that makes me think of just a statement from Alex Hormozi where he's talking about a lot of times one decision is holding back a whole cascade of decisions. And so imagine you have an employee that you need to coach or perhaps fire. The second that you have that conversation, the second you overcome that activation energy, the second that you take that leap to have that uncomfortable conversation, after you're finished, it's almost like you hit the zone and you're like, okay, what's next? What other conversation do I have? Who do I hit? Who do I hit? Who do I hit? What are we going to talk to? Who are we going to talk about? Boom, 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 boom. It's a cascade. And so that one leap generally is what's keeping you from seeing the beautiful sights. Now imagine an aircraft carrier. This is the analogy that came to my head. It's pretty intimidating to fly a jet in and of itself. Now imagine flying a jet off of the edge of an aircraft carrier with the possibility that you nosedive straight into the ocean before you even get off. Because I don't know if you know, but a lot of times getting off the runway, it's not a perfect descent. It's a hop off and then kind of take off. So there's a moment that you feel like you're truly falling. Imagine that that's what it's like in life. You take that leap. You're accelerating to something that you see the end of. You're like, my demise is at the end of this table, and I don't know if I can actually head upwards after I fall off the table. And it's really just push through it.
And oddly enough, most times that you take that leap, it's probably going to feel like that. Most times you take the leap, you're not going to instantaneously feel like you made the best decision ever until, some miles later or some hundreds of feet later that you'll actually feel like, okay, I'm trending upwards. A lot of things that we've encountered recently, it has been that, okay, we feel good about taking this leap. This has been very productive for us instantaneously. But initially, that wasn't how things, were,
right,
because we had to figure it out. But we knew that taking a leap was something that we had to do, like you said, to get to those things that we wanted to accomplish and those things that we wanted to see in the future. So at first, it might have started a little bit rocky, but the thing about taking the leap is no matter whether it feels good when you take the leap or not, you have to continue to keep flying upward. Because say if a pilot took the leap, as soon as they took the leap, they go to that little dip that you were talking about, and they panicked. They panicked, started fidgeting around. They weren't, steadfast in their control. Then they accidentally jerk a little bit, fly right into the ocean. So the very thing that you were scared of happening in the first place, because you didn't continue and you were scared and you got nervous and you panicked, you made that come to reality. But if you continue, whether you're scared or not, you eventually figure it out. And that is, of course, the scary thing about taking the leap, but also the nice thing about taking the leap. Because as you do it more often, you realize no matter if you got off to a bumpy start or a great start, more often than not, you figure out how to make the bumpy start or great start even better. Because as things progress for us, we realize that, again, whether good or bad, we're going to figure it out. And we've done it so many times to the point to where if we have that bumpy start, if we have that start where we drop off a little bit, it's not something that we're panicking about. It's something that is like, okay, how do we figure this out? This is a different problem than last time, but something I say is same shit, different toilet. So same problem, just a different scenario. Or, same headache that we have to deal with, just a different business, whatever. So that's something that you get better at handling and realizing that everything is not going to start off perfect. You taking the leap is not always going to be a decision that you're instantaneously happy about. It's something that I feel like you have to keep in mind always and continue, because there's been plenty of times in my life where I've taken the leap and I didn't see a trending of upward results until months later, until I could actually see it, whether it be physical, mental, spiritual, what have you. May not have seen the results until months later. But if you keep up the work, whether you see it or not, you eventually realize that you taking that leap was the catalyst to you progressing and being better as a person, getting better with your business, getting better health, whatever. So I think that's huge for us.
And you have a bullet point here that says, learn how to turn down your flight and turn up your fight response. And I want to expand on this. After I removed that piece of lint that was annoying me. One of the most difficult things to do in the sport of boxing or any combat sport in general is to reduce your flight response. Because oftentimes you want to run away from a punch. You want to run away from the fight. But in reality, you have to learn how to look the punch straight in the face, straight in the eyes, even though, the fist doesn't have eyes, but you need to stare at the punch and you need to find ways to adapt, whether it's parry, right? Whether it's step back, whether it's any adjustment that you need to make. And oftentimes you can even go into a punch.
Exactly.
Say it's a hook, right? And you can telegraph it, but you can't avoid it entirely. Go into it, reduce the apex of the punch, and you essentially nullify how strong it could be. Do you know how difficult it is to override your evolutionary default to flight or to flee, and to do it at a professional global, international level, that's exactly what we try to do on the day-to-day basis. And I don't mean just Austin and I mean the entirety of our viewership. And essentially anybody and everybody in today's world. Because all the little stressors that we have, from a confrontation in the workplace to road rage in the traffic to an accident that might happen at the grocery store, everything we either want to fight or flight. And the majority of the time we want to fight. But it's depending on how well can you adapt to the situation and how well can you hone in that fight response. Can you make I want to punch you to I will verbally de-escalate or escalate this confrontation or this situation? Are you in a business negotiation that's going poorly, and do you just ball up your fist and start swinging? Or do you start pulling heavy statistics that slap harder than anyone could?
Exactly. And this is a great point because our friend Lando, he used to be a boxer. I think he was ranked like number 3 or something in the U.S. when he was a kid. And one of the things that he said was, oddly enough, he kind of liked getting hit at the beginning of the fight because that anxiety and that pressure and that stress of trying to be perfect and not knowing how this punch is going to feel from this person that you may or may not know hits hard, it helps you lose all of that. Because once you get hit and you gain stability and you realize, oh shit, I'm still standing. He kind of hit like a pussy. Okay, now I can really fight. I can really get in my bag now. So you often find that out with a lot of things that you encounter in life. Once you turn that flight response off, fighting and going into the punch or going into the fight normally doesn't go as badly as what you think it is. Think it would. And I have this quote here, and I believe I took it from, I think it might have been Chris Williamson or Alex Hormozy, one of them. But
it's funny because I have a quote from Chris Williamson too.
Yeah. So shout out
to Chris Williamson,
yeah, shout out Chris
Alex Hormozy, the Modern Wisdom podcast, the Game podcast.
Exactly. All y'all. Shout out y'all. So he said, fear is like a mile-wide ocean that is an inch deep. So when we're talking about fear and turning off that flight response and making sure that you are turning that fight response up some more and some notches, you have to realize that more often than not, the thing that is stressing you out, the thing that is scaring you, the thing that is keeping you up at night looks scary. And it may actually be a little scary. But when you actually encounter it, your actual encounter with that thing rarely lives up to the perceived outcome that you make in your head. And your brain rightfully does this because you don't want to encounter a situation that you took for granted or that you didn't give the right, credibility of being dangerous. Because say I did that with a bear, I could die. But in most situations, especially nowadays, the things that we encounter and the things that we face rarely live up to the perceived, scariness that we make up in our heads. So when you're thinking about taking the leap and doing the things that you know that you need to do, but you're scared to do them, realize this: more often than not, they're not that bad. Most of the things that we've gotten into and had to take on, once we said, okay, we're going to do them, whether we are, confident in it or not, when we did the shit, it didn't go as horribly or as wrong as what most people think that it would have. Us randomly going into a CEO's office and sitting on his couch like we owned it.
Uninvited,
waiting for him to come there and say, hey, we have a business proposal for you. Initially, that sounds like the scariest thing ever. But doing it, when we actually did the shit, he was like, oh, Oh, he didn't say no? Okay. He's not telling us you're stupid? Okay. He's actually nodding and listening to what we're saying and saying, oh, okay. Wait, you guys did that for me before you came here? Wow. It was not as scary as what we would have thought it was. And I think a thing that helped us when we did that as well was we didn't even give it time to be scary. Most of the time when things are in our way that could be perceived dangers, we ruminate, we sit, we just think about it for days on end. And that just compounds the level of scary that it makes in your mind. But when you move fast, which we've talked about in the previous podcast, Veloz, when you move quickly, you don't even give your brain time to make up some gargantuan, scary, imposing situation in your head. You just act. So when you're thinking of fear and challenging your fears, again, act quickly and also think about it as a mile-wide ocean that's an inch deep. It looks scary, but more often than not, you can conquer it.
Wow, I feel motivated now. I'm going to go take a leap.
Take a leap, run through a brick wall.
Yes.
Yeah. You know?
After you bash it with your head repeatedly, take a couple steps back and then just ram through it with your shoulder.
And then somebody takes a comment or leaves a comment. It's like, yeah, I actually did exactly what you guys told me to do.
Didn't work.
And I'm in the hospital.
Sorry to hear that, my friend.
Yeah, sorry.
That's why
Tough.
you need to practice your flight response as well sometimes.
you know?
You got to walk away from battles you can't win.
Exactly. Even the Wright brothers knew that they had to have some wings in order to fly. So.
Bars. So that was actually an Alex Hormozy quote. And you probably thought it was Chris Williamson because Chris Williamson probably repeated it
he
to
did.
Alex
Yeah, he
Hormozy
did,
to
he
himself so he could explain it.
Yeah.
And I am going to pull another Chris Williamson quote that he said on the Iced Coffee Hour podcast, which
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
I don't know how I stumbled upon it, but I did. It probably showed up in my shorts feed. And hopefully we're showing up in yours.
That wasn't planned. It was just nice like that.
And essentially, take the leap. This is a quote that I thought of because it reminds me of the comforts that we have in today's society and how it's very easy to be drawn away from our roots and from our initial evolutionary patterns or behaviors. Because as I mentioned earlier, the amount of confrontations we have, the amount of little stressors or minute things that we have that peak our flight or fight response throughout the day has gone up, even from notifications on social media. Like imagine getting a hate comment and your blood pressure goes up. Our ancestors didn't have to deal with hate comments or high blood pressure because by the time it became a problem, it was they likely took a leap to a different life. So you go to buildings where people move heavy things so that you can repeatedly move them over and over again at one location, which is a gym. You go home to your cozy accommodations, a nice little apartment with air conditioning and convenient amenities directly at your doorstep, with a fridge full of food that was delivered to you by Uber Eats, as well as sitting down to watch Amazon Prime on your TV, which was also Amazon Primed. And there's a whole sequence of other conveniences and simplicities that add to our life. And when you focus on the reality of how convenient and how simple our lives have become, going into a place of work, relying on somebody else's brain power structures and systems, and almost guaranteeing that your accommodations are taken care of because you're getting a salary based off of something that you may not even have to formulate from nothing. These are all things that get us accustomed to living a simple life and not necessarily needing to take the leaps. So taking the leap seems like an outlier action. But as Alex Hormozy says, and I already forgot what he said, it's about, if you want to be outstanding, you will be outstanding. As in, to be phenomenal, you will be phenomenal on your own. It's by definition the truth. And so taking the leap is unconventional nowadays. So be the unconventional so that you can have unconventional success and progress and respect. Whatever you want, fill in the blank, unconventional blank, in the positive direction. So taking the leap will allow you to unlock new levels that you did not think were possible before.
And I think the exact quote, it could be another quote that's relatively similar, is be an exception so you can be exceptional.
There you go.
Yeah.
Similar.
Great words by Alex Hormozi, who has just bars like that. You know what I'm saying? So I think that this was a very informative podcast when initially, we came into it and maybe not knowing and maybe a little timid about getting into this topic so quickly and maybe not doing as much pre-production. But you realize that sometimes no matter how you feel about something, you have to take the leap. And as you say, imperfect action always trumps inaction. So sometimes, whether you feel good about it or not, whether you feel confident or not, whether you're pumped up about it or not, you have to take that leap. And more often than not, when you take that leap, you realize along the way, man, I can really fly. So, AM Club Podcast.
Signing out.